Okay. I was just thinking that Govardhan Puja for us is almost exactly the equivalent of Thanksgiving in the U.S. and also around the world. There are traditionally, at least in all the cultures I'm aware of, harvest festivals that take place right around this time. There's a mid-autumn festival in China. There's Diwali / Govardhan Puja in India. And in Canada and the US and a number of other countries, there's this Thanksgiving festival. And so Thanksgiving, simply put, is a post-harvest festival of gratitude where you offer appreciation because of the bounty that you've gotten from your summer crops. There's several growing seasons depending on where you are in the world, but there's two primary growing seasons. Those two primary growing seasons are your winter season, which is comparatively small, and your summer season. In India, you also get this pre-monsoon third season that gets put in there, but the two primary ones are your winter season and your summer season. By far, your summer season is the largest of the two. In India, you grow things like sugarcane and rice, corn, millet, any number of other essential staple items that people depend on all year long are grown in this summer harvest. You plant the seeds right around just prior to the monsoon season. The monsoon comes, everything gets well watered. It's a quick season, things grow, and they're bountiful, and then that production lasts you all through the winter season. Now, in North India, it gets really cold and it snows. But even in the rest of the subcontinent, you become dependent on the bounty of summer for the rest of the year. And so as such, it's natural to give thanks, it's natural to be grateful, to express that. And in fact, that is the precursor exactly of this festival. This festival is called Annakut. Kut means a mountain, and Anna means of grains. Interestingly, wheat doesn't grow. Wheat is a summer crop in the U.S. and in Europe. The primary staple of the diet for, Western civilization. Ukraine actually grows a ton of wheat. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but as a result of the war that's going on in Ukraine, wheat production has dipped down tremendously. It's caused, I wouldn't say it's like a famine, but it's definitely shook the world market and prices have gone up, skyrocketed. Wheat in the West takes about 9 months or 10 months to grow. In India, it's a short season. They plant in the wintertime. It's a milder climate. And then they harvest around April or something like that. So wheat's not one of the crops that they grow, but all the other major staples. Rice, of course, is a huge staple. But in the West, where we're heavily wheat dependent, then you would have just harvested wheat in September, October, and so the granaries are all full. And anyway, Annakut means a mountain of grains, which in this case would be rice and millet, corn, and things like that. And so the same way that we kind of have I don't want to call them iconographies, but we have illustrations or paintings or pictures of, can you guys think of what's the most common illustration of Thanksgiving, other than the turkey. Yeah. Yeah, cornucopia, right? This like horn of plenty filled with bountiful food. That's almost exactly what the Annakut was. It was a mountain of food that was made. So in India, at this time of the year, people have harvested their crops and they're secure in the wintertime. In countries where it snows and where it gets really cold, then if you don't do good in your summer harvest, you die in the wintertime. And so largely we are separated from this regular struggle, this yearly struggle with life and death, because you can go down to the corner grocery store or supermarket, or even like a gas station or a 7-Eleven, and you could pick up the staples of life if you need to 24 hours a day, and we're never really separated. And not only can we get the basics of life, but you can get avocados from Australia, crazy stuff, wild things that we have no right to have. And they're shipped oftentimes by airplanes in cold storage, and they time it all so that they harvest them when they're not quite ripe, and then they ship them and gas them sometimes, and you get ripe avocados even from Australia sometimes. So we're not in touch so much with that struggle for life and death. But in a traditional agrarian society, you really are giving thanks, because you're going to survive the wintertime because of what's come. And then what's come has been as a result of this plentiful rainfall, especially in India where you have the monsoon season. And which is what grows the crop that we're talking about right now. And so this incredible amount of rainfall has come, and it has brought India, which was drying up and almost undergoing like a desertification type thing. Every year India gets so dry and desiccated. It gets so hot, and it gets so kind of unbearably hot. People get heat rashes. You have to stay inside, or even underground during the day. People come out at night. The whole schedule of the country, at least in the northern part of the country, changes as it just gets just like incomparably hot. Especially if you don't have air conditioning, which again is another way to fortify yourself against nature. And so India was becoming a desert. And then the monsoons come, and it rains, and the crops come up, and now you've got the crops, and they last you through the wintertime, and you're part of something much bigger than yourself. You're part of something much bigger than yourself that you don't have control over, that you are experiencing like the blessings of Mother Nature every year through the change of the seasons and through the crop cycle. And then, one time a year after the crops have been harvested, you give thanks, and you give something back, and you have a feast, and you celebrate. Anyway, that's the background of Thanksgiving all over the world, and it's also the background of today's festivities. And in fact, there's a mountain of food. Like, we literally make a mountain of food. That's what we do. The mountain's made out of food. FYI, it's edible. The whole thing's edible. It looks like sand. It's not. It's halwa. And so the whole thing's edible. So that's the background. And you can't really appreciate what happened with the celebration unless you have this prerequisite knowledge. And given that all of us grow up going to Ralph's or Pavilions, we don't have this feeling, unless you're a farmer. unless you're from the flyover states, the states that you just fly over, you never stop in. And so unless you're from the breadbasket, the middle states, the Red Sea, so to speak, then we don't experience it. Even there, if you go monocrops, and it's not as connected. It's the bartering system and raising crops and sharing them with friends and bartering and things like that. It's not done anymore. And so you're selling your monocrops for cash, and it's a whole different scene. But at least in the Midwest, it is kind of a boom or bust every year, depending on how your crops grow. At least there is that. There's a boom or bust that happens every year, so at least you're in touch with that. But yeah, largely here we don't experience that, and so it's important to just spend a moment and think about what it's like to live in touch with nature. You depend on sunshine, you depend on rainfall. Every summer, things dry up, then the monsoons come, the rains come. Actually, we even have that in the U.S. If you go like for instance, for example, to Texas or Missouri or any of those Midwestern states, and you spend time there during the summer, it'll be hot and humid. And then about halfway through the day, towards the afternoon, evening time, clouds will roll in, it'll rain, and it's quite pleasant because it was hot and humid enough, and the rain breaks the humidity to some extent, and it cools everything down, and it's quite pleasant. And you get this bountiful rain every day. Sometimes there's a bit of thunder and lightning, but it's not oppressive. So even to some extent in the U.S., in the Midwest, where crops grow abundantly, you get this experience of like a mini monsoon type thing. What's Brazil like?
You have thunderstorms, you'll be pretty heavy, and you'll come all of a sudden.
Yeah, of course Brazil is south of the equator, so bizarrely it's reversed. I've been to Brazil in December, and which was the summertime, and I remember there was, or maybe I was there in June, it was the winter time. Actually, I was there in June, and it was the winter time. I wasn't there in December. I was there in June, it was the winter, and there was a lot of rain going on. There's a rainy season there, right? Yeah. So it happens, depends where you are and when it happens, but there's this rainy season, this summer season, kind of a dry and a wet season, the crops grow. You got to be close to the earth to feel it. But you can think about it. I depend on the turn of the seasons. I depend on sunlight and rainfall. I can't engineer these things. They happen automatically. And every year I'm able to ensure my survival and my thriving and my security by the grace of the rain, by the grace of the sun. And I kind of just go around and collect. It's sort of wild. You throw seeds in the ground. If you've ever grown anything, it's kind of crazy. You throw seeds in the ground, you put some water on, all of a sudden you have passion fruits. Or sitafal, or whatever it is. All of a sudden you have some amazing, like how is that even possible? Some random seed you throw on the ground, and then you put water on it, and then epic fruits and vegetables grow, and you get to consume them. This is how people have felt for thousands of years at this time of year. And winter's coming. That's a Game of the Thrones reference. But it wasn't intended to be, but it happened naturally. Winter's just, it's just right there. And winter's desolate. People die. You don't have heating. It's like it's no joke. And if you don't have food, you can't just whip it up by going down to Ralph's. You had to secure that in the summertime. And so the winter's coming, and you know those times are going to be hard, but you've got this stock of grains, and you and your family and everyone's going to make it through, and you're grateful. And so you perform some kind of ritual to show your appreciation. Now, you're fine. It's cool. So Thanksgiving is so secularized in the U.S. that there's nothing particularly religious about it. Easter, another major holiday, and Christmas, another major holiday. And surprisingly, I mean, these things are so woven in the fabric of America that our school year hinges around vacations for Easter and Christmas, which are, just integrally a part of Christianity. Although Jesus wasn't born in December, it's a pagan holiday that got co-opted by the Christians, historically verifiable. But Thanksgiving is like another major holiday, almost second just to Christmas and Easter. And of course, summer, that's your summer vacation. So summer's linked to the natural cycle of the seasons. Christmas and Easter are linked to these their Christian components. And then you have Thanksgiving. It's kind of like unattached, but it's linked to the season. And you get a 4-day holiday. It's something. How often do you get a 4-day holiday? How often do you get, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and usually get off on like halfway through Wednesday? How often do you get that kind of a break? It's a big holiday for us. But it's almost entirely separate from any kind of religious context. You just kill a turkey, and I mean, none of us do that, but you break some bread and hang out. Of course, if you're a Christian, you'll say a prayer, but it's very secularized. So something funny happened thousands of years ago at the Hindu Thanksgiving. And so they were getting ready for Thanksgiving. The devotees were getting ready for Thanksgiving. And this was sort of pre-Krishna. So when you look at Vaishnavism is really the if you study Judaism is in many ways the rise to prominence of a monotheistic tradition within a polytheistic milieu. Babylon and Egypt and the Middle East, they were largely polytheistic. Although there was monotheism prior to Judaism. The ancient Greeks during the before the time of Buddha, during the archaic period of Greek history, there was a group of thinkers that postulated that Jesus was the Supreme Lord and that all the other demiurges were subservient and that there was one true omnipotent Supreme Lord. So you find movements towards monotheism cropping up within the polytheistic world. All over the place. But Judaism was the rise of this monotheistic tradition within a polytheistic milieu. And so you had the Babylonians, the Ishtars and the Baals, and you had the Egyptians with their different deities. And then you had the Jewish cult, the Jewish tradition, which grew up and said, hey, there's one deity. There's one supreme, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent deity. That's the creator of everything. In many ways, Vaishnavism is that same phenomena within Hinduism. Now, we would argue that we were always there and we just got more popular over time. But you can look in the oldest of Vedic literatures, like in the Rig Veda, the oldest Sanskrit literature on the planet, and you'll find verses like Om Tat Vishnoho Padamam Padagung Sada Pasyanti Surayaha Deviva Chakrata Tam, that that all of the gods look at the feet of Vishnu. And so you'll find verses like that in the oldest of Vedic texts, indicating that the worship of one supreme Lord has been around as long as the Vedas have been around. But just as now, polytheism was kind of normative and sort of standard. And so there was a group of devotees, and they were accustomed to worshiping Indra, the rain god. Kind of like Thor, kind of like Zeus, just, kind of a rain god. And Indra was pretty prominent. If you look at the Rig Veda, for instance, there's a lot of time spent talking about Indra. Now, rain and being beholden to and indebted to and obliged to rain, well, that makes perfect sense because your whole life is dependent on the water cycle, which is amazing. There's like this huge cesspool of salt water that has just no value to you whatsoever, practically speaking. You could be sitting here on the shore here, and the ocean's there, and you're just like, what are you going to do? Boiling water and distilling it just doesn't work. It's too labor intensive. It's not cost effective. So you get this massive salt water that is of no value to you. It's like you're like in the water and you're dying of dehydration, the salt water, and the final thing that happens before you're wiped out is you drink the salt water because you're so thirsty. It's all around you. You just can't resist. And that makes you even more dehydrated, and that's it. You're done. But there's this wild phenomenon where the sun dries up all the salt water, pulls it up into clouds, desalinates it by that process, distills it for you, and then the clouds travel all the way over land, up into the mountains, rains down, forms a snowpack, which then melts, creates rivers, and your dry land is now, and you can drink, and you can bathe, and you can clean, and of course it also waters your crops. So this dependence on the cycle of life, if you had to epitomize what's our dependence, it's on rain. It's the essence of it all, it's on rain. And the sun, those two things. And so those usually become the deities that you worship in a polytheistic tradition. And in a monotheistic tradition, we say stuff like the sun and the moon or the eyes of the deity. And so there's still an acknowledgement of the incredible indebtedness we have to these things. So anyway, these, let's call them pre-devotees, had just finished receiving the bounty that the summer crops gave them. They'd harvested, they were feeling confident they were going to make it through another year. They were grateful, and so they had an old ritual they did. They did a ritual for Indra. And it consisted of making a mountain of food. And then offering a yagna and giving something back. Really, the whole process of ritual is an attempt to try to give something back. And so you're receiving and you want to give something back. And that's religious ritual as a way to symbolically give something back. And say, and have some appreciation. Anyway, Krishna wanted to teach these pious souls a lesson. And so he descended down from heaven in a disguised form, incognito. Which is difficult to conceive of. In other words, like the soul of all creation, the genesis of the entire universe, the mother and father of the cosmos, that Krishna then appeared in this world incognito. It's a how much longer are we talking about Sachimata? Okay. I'll just wait for you. That's okay. I just can't. It's hard for me. They're all doing a good job of paying attention. I'm having a hard time. I mean, you can probably do it afterwards. It's a wild idea that the soul of all creation will just appear incognito. Of course, there would be no reason why it would be impossible. An omnipotent deity could certainly descend into his creation. That could certainly happen. And to not compromise the free will, he might choose to do so incognito. And there might be some lesson or some upliftment for the world. And all good God would certainly want to uplift the world. But for love to exist and devotion to be possible, you couldn't completely compromise the free will of the individual soul. So you might choose to descend incognito, and you're uplifting the world. That's your goodness, and you're able to do so. That's your omnipotence. And then you do so incognito to not get in the way of people's free will. And so Krishna did that. And he showed up. And he approached the main organizer of the festival, whose name was Nanda. Nanda was just such a great devotee. And there's a whole other side of the story that I'm not telling, just to make it appropriate for the Sunday feast. But if you really want to understand the full story, really what happened was Nanda is a great angelic personality who loves Krishna intimately. And they're so much in love with one another that Nanda just loves Krishna without limit to such an extent that he forgets Krishna's God and just thinks of him as the object of his affection. He loves him so intimately, he starts to think Krishna's my son. I don't want to take something from you and say, our Father, give us this day our daily bread and thank you. I want to just give to you. And so instead of thinking of you as my father, I'm going to think of you as my son. And so Nanda is this angelic devotee who loves Krishna so intimately, he forgets Krishna's God so that he can love him without limit. And that loving him without limit turns into this meditation on the deity as being his child, so he doesn't ask for anything and have gratitude for what he's gotten, but rather he just gives spontaneously without ever asking for anything in return, the way a parent gives to their child. And that Nanda appeared in this world, and Krishna appeared with him as his child. And so the incognito appearance of Krishna to teach this lesson to the world simultaneously occurred with this incognito, divine, rapturous forgetfulness between the devotee and the Lord as the ultimate zenith of love. And to illustrate that possibility for the world, they appeared and performed pastimes and then also taught this lesson. So two things got done with one action. The amazing possibilities in how you can love divinity were shown, how intimate love with divinity can be, and then simultaneously we're taught to worship one deity and not many, and to see that there's one ultimate cause of everything. So Krishna appeared, incognito. And and said to Nanda, his father, he said, "What's going on? And Nanda said, oh, my son, you're too young to remember, but every year, out of thanks for receiving all the rain, we do a big yagna to Indra, a big worship of Indra. And we do this so that every year we'll have enough to survive. And we are an agrarian community and we depend on the rain. And so we need to show our thanks so that it'll happen. And then Krishna didn't just say you should worship one Supreme Lord. That's how I would tell the story if I was telling it to a new person. But it was a little more tricky than that. That is part of what Krishna taught, but he did so in a slightly more poetic and fun and dramatic way. Krishna actually ended up arguing somewhat like an atheist, like almost like a Buddhist. He said, what do you mean we're dependent on Indra for the rain, which show gratitude? Don't you see it rains on the desert and it rains on even on the ocean? And it's not like the rain's favoring us. It's just happening automatically. And everyone has their karma. He at least believed in karma. Everyone has their karma. And so everything's going on by karma, action and reaction over many lifetimes. And so whatever we get, we get. And anyway, we're cowherds. We're not agrarian. We're Vaishyas. And Vaishyas can either survive by money lending or business or cowherding or agriculture. And we are the cowherd community. So we don't even need to grow crops. We just wander around. And so we're not even dependent on that agrarian lifestyle. We're more nomadic. We're more Bedouin in the way we live. And if there is a creator, then he doesn't interfere with the creation, and we have to make our own way. Which is that position is also called deism, by the way. Anyway, so Krishna in this way expressed some sort of an atheistic philosophy with karma attached, called karma mimamsa. It's an early Vedic theory. And so then Krishna kind of just did a segue, and he said, listen, you want to offer a festival and give thanks? Give thanks to the mountains on which we depend for our livelihood. And so here's Govardhan, this beautiful mountain that we exist around and traverse, and it has beautiful lakes and flowers and fruit trees and so many things. Let's make a mountain of food and offer it to Govardhan. And Nanda Baba, being an angel, he looked angelic. He had, beautiful white teeth and a soft countenance and a salt and pepper beard, and it looked almost like his countenance, his complexion was like, almost looked like it was like drops of nectar. It almost seemed like the drops of nectar that was his face were dripping down into his black beard, and that's why his black beard appeared salt and pepper. And he was just in love with Krishna. So whatever Krishna said, Krishna's words are just like his flute. Krishna's like Pan. He's like the Pied Piper. He's like Cupid himself, the transcendental Cupid. And so as Krishna speaks, his words are this seductive flute sound emanating from his mouth. And so Nanda said, yes, whatever you say, son, let's do that. And he told all of the cow community, yes, let's make a mountain. Let's just offer it all to Govardhan. Everyone's like, okay, let's do that. And so they huge mountains of rice covered with ghee, so they looked like they were, shimmering in gold, and different dals and puris and fried cakes, also stacked into huge piles, and shrikand. There's all the dairy products that they were dependent on. Oceans of yogurt is described. It's this huge cornucopia of food. This massive mountain of food. Huge bowls of ghee and shrikand and kheer and all the stuff you might imagine. And then there was Brahmins chanting mantras, and there were singers and musicians. All the ladies got dressed up in their finest attire, and all the cows were decorated. Everybody got invited, and they had a big kirtan, and then they walked around the hill doing kirtan. And as they walked around the hill, they made different offerings as they were going around the hill. And everything was just offered to Govardhan, to one place, to something which was actually more important. And the gods of the Vedas were ignored. The gods of Egypt were ignored. The gods of the Vedas were ignored. As the devotion of this community became more and more focused on Krishna's desire. And then Indra got upset. Close the door. Indra got upset. And he freaked out. It was like, in many ways, like the God of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, it sounds a lot like an Indra. I'm a jealous God, and thou shalt have no other gods before me. That kind of angry, violent, smiting and smoting deity that'll send you to hell for a thought crime. That sounds more akin to Indra. It sounds more akin to Indra. And so although it's a monotheistic tradition, it seems like they just elevated a demiurge to the position of God as opposed to really thinking it through of what an omnipotent, omnibenevolent deity would actually look like. Anyway, Indra got upset. And he sent the Samvarta clouds, these clouds of universal devastation. And they blacked out the sky. And so the whole universe was in this andatamas, this blind darkness. Except for Vrindavan, because Krishna's effulgence is so great that even if there's no sun, Krishna's effulgence acts like a sun and illuminates Vrindavan. And so the Brijvasis weren't in darkness, although the rest of the universe was. And then these clouds began pouring down columns of rain. And hailstones. And it was a deluge. It was a great flood. And everyone was going to drown. And then this very unusual thing occurred. As a general rule, our devotees never ask Krishna for anything. Our prayer isn't like, thank you for what you gave me. Our prayer is just, what can I give? How can I be of service? It's a general staple of our theology, not to ask for anything. A haituki bhakti. Bhakti that is not caused by anything. You're not asking for anything. You're not thankful, which is why you can't think of God as your father, because you think of God as your father, you're thanking him for things, or your mother, you're thanking her for things. But to really exemplify a haituki bhakti, or this causeless devotion, you have to stop asking for anything, which means you have to stop thinking about God as your parent who gave you stuff and then you say thanks, and you have to start thinking of God as your child, so you just give without thinking about getting anything back. So as a general staple of our philosophical worldview, our theology, we don't ask Krishna for stuff. And this isn't just something we say. I mean, you pray for service. You pray to be of service. You pray to be an instrument. Actually, funny enough, they made this big offering to the hill, and then Krishna wanted to encourage these devotees, his tribe. And so he became a deity on top of Govardhan Hill and began personally eating the offerings. And then Krishna said, look, Govardhan's alive. Just see, normally the trees are Govardhan's arms, but now Govardhan actually has arms. And normally Govardhan doesn't move, but now he's walking around. And normally the cave is Govardhan's mouth, but now he actually has a mouth. And then the devotees all looked up and they saw that there was a deity on top of the hill eating all the offerings, this like incredible form this like huge, almost like a Virat Rup Darshan, like from the Gita, where Arjuna saw the universe as Krishna, like almost like that, saw a personal form eating all these offerings. And they were encouraged. And they said, thank you, Krishna, for giving us this advice. And Krishna said, no, I'm just an instrument. Krishna tells Arjuna, you can only be my instrument. Nimitta matra bhavasavya sachin. You can only be my instrument. So Krishna says, I'm just an instrument. But it's his avatar is sitting on top of the hill eating the offerings to encourage people. Anyway, then Indra got upset. Then he sent these rain clouds. And there was this, this deluge, this flood that occurred. Now, normally the devotees never ask Krishna for anything. But that principle is superseded by another principle called Krishnaika Sharanam. That devotees always surrender to Krishna in every circumstance. So if in your life there's ever a moment where you fall off a cliff or you are completely without shelter and everything's fallen apart, then the natural etchings on the soul of a devotee mean they always turn to Krishna. And so when you're in a situation where you absolutely need help, devotees naturally, because they're always turning towards Krishna, they turn to Krishna for help. And the Brijbasis cried out to Krishna, please save us. Even though he was their child, even though they thought of him as a child, even though they did not think of him as the Supreme Lord. Because if they thought of him as the Supreme Lord, their devotion would be abridged, their devotion would be formalized, their devotion would be hegemonic, their devotion would be formal, it wouldn't be intimate, it wouldn't be sweet. Just like your relationship with a judge is different than your relationship with your best friend. And so rulers make bad lovers, and for love to reign supreme, people have to get to a place where they forget Krishna's divinity and just love him. He happens to be the soul of the universe and the creator of everything, but you just love him as your best friend, as your lover, as your child. But even in that moment, because there was an absolute disaster, the Brijbasis cried out, please Krishna, save us. And so Krishna ran over to Govardhan Hill, this huge, massive mountain, and just picked it up. Just picked it up with his left hand. Not even like work, Krishna's right-handed, so normally you pick something big up with your right hand. But if it's light, you just pick it up with your left hand because it's so light. Krishna picked up Govardhan Hill with his left hand, held it up in the air. Which sounds insane. But why would an omnipotent deity who's able to come into this world incognito to teach some great lesson also be able to perform a miracle to teach another lesson? Why couldn't that happen? I mean, the miracle of consciousness is all around us. Your own consciousness is as much a miracle as Krishna picking up Govardhan Hill. You're just used to it. You don't think about it too much. If you do, consciousness itself is an earth-shattering miracle. Chemicals don't have the ability to think and feel and have free will. We don't find that in the chemical world. How is it that we have these things? So anyway, Krishna performed this miracle. He picked up Govardhan Hill. And then as he picked up Govardhan Hill, boulders fell off the hill and formed a natural perimeter all around it so the rain couldn't get in. He said, Krishna said, look, it's beautiful under here. And there was a replica of Vrindavan under the hill, with fields for the cows to graze on and lakes and everything. It was just all right there. And the Brijbasis were they couldn't believe it. This is our version of the Red Sea being parted. And so then they ran underneath. Everybody fit. The cows were grazing on around the perimeter, and then there were lions on top of Govardhan, and they got picked up in the air, and they hit the clouds and were ripping the clouds apart. The clouds were dissipated, and leaves and flowers were falling off of the mountain, and it seemed like Govardhan was crying, being touched by Krishna's hand. And Krishna was sitting there, and he was playing his flute with his other hand, sitting in his Tribhanga Sham Sundar form. And everyone came under, and they were just mesmerized, looking at Krishna, feeling and they were thinking, Govardhan looks like a jeweled umbrella, and Krishna's arm is like an emerald pole holding the umbrella up, and they were just mesmerized. Yashoda came up, Krishna's mother. She started massaging Krishna's hand, feeling concerned that Krishna, his hand might hurt from holding up the mountain. And Krishna's friends were saying, no, it's light. And Krishna himself was saying, no, it's light. The same Govardhan that just ate your offerings. He just made himself light. That's the only reason I could pick him up. And Yashoda said, I don't believe you. If he's that light, then let him fly around without you even holding him up. And then you can sit down, I'll feed you from my breast, and then I'll be pacified. And then Madhu Mangal said, no, I'll just hold him up on my stick. You see that sometimes in the iconography. You see all the cowherd men with their sticks. They're like, hey, Krishna, sit down. The men are here now. We'll hold the hill up. You're just a boy. Sit down, let the men do this job. And so there was this great ecstatic festival of love where even while Krishna was showing his divinity, his Aishwaryatva, his Bhagavatva, his divinity, his godhood, the devotees were so filled with love they didn't accept it. Even in the face of that, even though they turned to Krishna in their moment of need, that glory, which would then obfuscate or attenuate love, it couldn't sink in, and they still treated Krishna like their child. And they sat there for days enjoying one another's company in this super intimate Gupta Vrindavan, the secret Vrindavan under Govardhan Hill, completely aloof from the comings and goings in the material world, the torrential downpour and the floods and the deluge. Indra figured it out. He realized he'd made a mistake. And he dismissed the clouds and then showed up later in a quiet place, in a lonely place. He showed up and apologized to Krishna. And Krishna said, yeah, you got proud. You thought you were in charge. Didn't think there was anything above you. And so, I want you to do great things. I've empowered you to do great things. But you got a big ego about it, so I had to knock you down to size. And so go back and do your service, but have some humility. And Indra, with his tail between his legs, went back to running the universe on Krishna's behalf, but without the illusion that he was a big man. And Krishna put down the hill, and by then the water had all dried up, and everyone went back to life. And Giridhari ki, Giri Govardhana ki, and that's the Leela. There's a lot of lessons you learn from the story. Amazing story. What do we learn from the story? Non-rhetorical question. Let's come up with a dozen things we learned from the story.
Real power comes from your love for somebody.
Love trumps power. It's such a wild idea. Normally you think of a classical conception of God. God's huge and big and old and you're scared of him. And that whole thing gets subverted and turned on its head. Honestly, uniquely within the Vaishnava tradition of ancient India. And you think of loving God as a child, as your son, but it's not immature, pre-philosophical idea. It's a post-doctorate idea where you really tease out what it means to love. That's one. What else do we learn? Yes?
Not to ask Krishna for anything.
We learn not to ask Krishna for stuff. You were listening on the way down. All right. I was upset at you for raising your hand. I'm thinking, why are you raising your hand? You got your 2 minutes to go. You don't have a right to raise your hand. Okay, you listened on the way down. Fair enough. So, yes, we should not ask Krishna for anything. That's 2. There's a corollary idea. What's the other one?
And in a time of our deepest need, that we actually cry out to Krishna.
That's right. And that's trumped by always crying out to Krishna. Don't abuse it, but that's also part of our tradition. It's actually a really nuanced theological idea of not being a taker, of being a giver, of focusing on giving. And at the same time, also always turning towards divinity. And when those occasional moments happen, to still do that and not to become callous. It's a very nuanced, razor's edge position. Good, that's 3. More?
Don't get a big ego when we come in and empower us.
Yeah, we are Indra. We're all empowered to do something amazing in this world. All of us can do amazing things in this world. Bring a lot of light into the world. But we got to remember we're just an instrument. I remember we're just an instrument. And Krishna's so slick. He said, I'm just an instrument. Teaching us how we should feel. What else? Yeah.
Because of Nanda Maharaj's pure and simple love for Krishna, he was able to forego this really important ritual that was supposed to take care of his whole day.
Yeah, sometimes you got to prove your trust in the divine. Sometimes you got to let go of something. We're all closet atheists, holding on to our pet peeves or our vices or our attachments. But part of being a devotee means you have to let that stuff go and grow and purify. And that happens in the course of life. And we need to learn how to gracefully move forward. Excellent point, Damodar. More. That's 5. Yeah.
Krishna is the source of all the demigods.
Krishna is the source of all demigods. That's it's such an important point because, and my wife was saying to me that we went to Greece recently. We took a group of people, 50 people to Greece, and all the pagan temples on the islands that we were at, they'd all been converted into churches. And there's sometimes you'd see old statues, broken down statues of the pagan deities. And my wife was like, these awful Christians. Of course, Christians all got their karma. The Muslims came in the Ottoman Empire and then turned them all into mosques. And so, it all came back to them, Hagia Sophia, in Istanbul was the biggest church in the world, became the Blue Mosque. And so it all comes back to you. But my wife made the point, how cool would it be if you went to Greece and they were just really sophisticated polytheists and the religion had become post-philosophical and they'd actually developed and it would look much more like Hinduism. I never thought that myself, but my wife being born a devotee, she had an appreciation for that. I thought it was a really cool point. But yeah, this revelation, whether or not you get rid of all the demigods or whether they become subservient to an ultimate governing principle, this idea of moving towards many disparate devotions, towards a pure devotion, towards one source, an elegant devotion, a simple devotion. It's that story, it's such a clear lesson in the story that oftentimes gets overlooked. But this is the rise to prominence of monotheism within a polytheistic culture. Such an important point. We're halfway there. What else we got? Yes, sir.
In the immediate sense, we're dependent on nature, but in the ultimate sense, we're dependent on God.
What a beautiful idea and how well expressed. Can't even improve on it. We should recognize our dependence on nature, and we shouldn't stop there with that surface understanding, but we should pierce through that and understand that ultimately nature also has a source and become then beholden to and grateful to that source. What a great point. So you get credit for 2 points there. Excellent. We're only going to give you 1 though because I want to get more, but that's a great point. Should be 2. Yes.
All purposes are served by directing all sacrifice to Krishna.
Yeah, you water the root of a tree and the whole tree flourishes. All the leaves. You don't have to water the individual leaves. There's a certain beauty in the simple devotion of the rise of monotheism within polytheism. There's a certain simplicity and a certain beauty to that, and it makes for a much more integrated life, a much less disjointed life, a much less fearful life. It frees you from fear. Excellent. More. Yes.
No matter how challenging and hard things get, Krishna's got you covered, literally.
Yeah, this is actually the most important lesson of the whole story. There's been some winners. Yours was a winner. Yours was a winner. That is the ultimate lesson of the whole story. Devotees cry when they think about how much Krishna loves them. That anytime they really need help, Krishna will personally involve himself in their life and rescue them. Devotees experience this, and it moves them. And the reason why this story and this festival is so important to our tradition is because it, in an incredibly dramatic way, teaches this point. It teaches this point. Yogakshemam vahami aham. I will personally protect and maintain you. Goptritve varanam rakshishiti bishwas. You need to have faith that Krishna will protect me, and you have to accept that Krishna will maintain you. We're not alone. There's someone looking out for us. And if you can connect with that divine current, you are a success. You have won the game of life. And you'll experience it. You'll experience it daily, and in your times of greatest needs, you'll experience it most prominently. Krishna is not the X factor. Krishna is the given. Our acceptance of Krishna's mercy and grace is the X factor in the equation. We need to work on that. Devotees just, when they think of Govardhan Leela, they just think of how beautiful, how wonderful, how loving, how sweet, how kind, how magnanimous, how chivalrous, how courageous Krishna is. And seductive, and beautiful, and elegant. And these aspects of divinity, they overwhelm and they melt the hearts of the devotees, and they swim in an ocean of gratitude and bliss. This festival is really old. Thousands of years old. And we celebrate all over the world our temples. It's important, and it epitomizes this core sentiment of a devotee. Krishna will protect me. Krishna will maintain me. Krishna always has me. Krishna's got me covered. And that's why devotees are fearless. Not because they have a big ego, but because nothing can take that away. Mute it. More. Yes?
Krishna gives us free will by not displaying his divinity.
How slick is Krishna, right? He shows up, teaches you lessons, shows his omnipotence, but does it in such a way that your free will is not compromised. There's enough there for you to grab a hold of if you want it, but not so much that your free will is nullified and you're in some kind of prison where God's right in front of you, screaming at you every day. What a nice point. What an important point. Thank you. Yes?
A devotee who is in touch with Krishna is ready to pivot at any moment.
Yeah, devotees are flexible. They're flexible. They can pivot. They're not trying to make it's like you stop in a train station in India for 5 minutes, and if you drink chai, then you should stop. But you can grab a fruit juice, or hit the hand pump if you need to. Relieve yourself real quick, but the train's leaving in a couple of minutes. You don't jump out and build a house. Your train's going somewhere. It's just stopping off in the train station for a minute. People try to build something permanent in this material world, but if they're building, it's like trying to, build a house on the water, something like that, Of course, that is technically possible, but you guys get the point I'm making. And so, devotees rather anchor themselves to, let them in. Move off the stairs and let them in. Come in. Ow. Don't block the stairs. You're blocking pilgrims from coming in the temple. Who would want to do such a horrible thing? You come in, move in. There's room for everyone. But if you're like a boulder, you're blocking the Brijbasis from coming under Govardhan Hill. Devotees are flexible. They're anchored to Krishna. And that allows them to surf the waves of the material world and to go with the current and always land on their feet. Excellent point. Now you're starting to get into stuff I didn't even think about. I see you. Now you're getting into stuff I didn't even think about. Now people are starting to give most of these things I thought of. I wove them into the story a little bit. You impressed me with the double. That was a great one. But that was one I didn't even think of. Excellent. Yes.
Krishna is all good and all powerful.
Yeah, we have an all-good, all-powerful deity. He wants to uplift us. He can uplift us, and we just have to be receptive to it. You guys both got like these core, essential points. And sometimes we forget about them. We get into the more of the minutiae and the intermediate and advanced points. But they have to be built on this bedrock. Just like you have to understand harvest festivals and agrarian society to understand the importance of a festival like this, and the flexibility that was displayed and the willingness to have some faith. And we'll finish with Varangi.
Gratitude done right leads to theism.
Yeah, that's a really nice addendum to what Dom said. We start to look around the world and we find things to be grateful for. And when you're grateful to a person. And you start to move up the food chain and you finally realize there's somebody behind it all who loves you. We say the universe is trying to help me. What do you really mean? The universe is trying to help you? That means the universe can think. Because how can it try and help you if it can't think? That means the universe is conscious. That means the universe cares about you. It's like it's looking out for you. It means it's benevolent. It can help you. Therefore, it's powerful. All of a sudden, you got this all-powerful, all-knowing, all-benevolent universe. And really, you're talking about God. You're just too cowardly to admit it. And so gratitude moves you towards theism. Thankful towards nature, and then thankful to the source of all nature. Great addendum. I see you guys. Yes?
Krishna can teach us so many lessons simultaneously by just one.
Yes, Krishna's clever. He's chatura. Chatura? He's clever. And therefore, he can teach many lessons with one act. That's one of Krishna's unlimited qualities, is his ability to teach many things with one act. Great. Yes?
He holds up Govardhan Hill with this little finger of his left hand, effortless, not wanting to intimidate with his violent strength and superpower, but effortless. I also play the flute over here.
Yes. Krishna is elegance extraordinaire. He's the superlative example of panache and style. He's the all-attractive one. And so when you're in touch with Krishna, you're in a state of grace. And you also have grace under pressure. You're also poised under pressure because you're riding shotgun. Krishna's not riding shotgun to you. Jesus isn't your co-pilot. You're his co-pilot. You follow? Everybody's got it all wrong. And it's not the goal of life to get Jesus your co-pilot. The goal of life is to be his co-pilot and to follow his lead. And so there's an incredible elegance in the pastime, a sweetness, an expertise. Wonderful point. Thank you. Yeah.
He let his devotees feel like they were in control of that holding up, and he was doing it. Like they actually felt like they were holding.
He got them to participate, right? He also persuaded them. He didn't try to force them. It wasn't like you must do this. It wasn't a decree from on high. Thou shalt this or thou shalt that. Krishna engaged with them philosophically and persuaded them. Helped them to see the error of their ways. It's like an anti-deity. It's like the anti-mall. It's still a mall. They call it the anti-mall because it's cooler than the regular mall. Everything's more expensive. And so, yes, absolutely. What was your point?
The point is that he lets, even though he's the most
That's
powerful,
right.
he lets you serve him. Still,
That's right.
Even in moments
That's
like
right. Krishna preserves your free will. He empowers you. He lets you make your moves. Doesn't steal the thunder. Doesn't take all the glory. Leaves something for you. Absolutely. Excellent point. Anybody else? We're, by the way, at 16 already, yes?
Yeah, he facilitates our devotion towards him if we desire, so even in the most testing times.
What a nice point. That the devotees who went through this experience became the best devotees. Normally we go through difficult times and it breaks us. We have some dark night of soul. La noche oscura del alma. We have some kind of dark night of the soul. It's a dark time for us, a time of doubt. But the devotees in their darkest time, they turned even more towards Krishna. And their devotion grew, and they came through the most difficult experiences, and they were the most elevated. And they had the most faith. The world literally couldn't knock them down. Nothing could stop them. They had gone to a place that time couldn't touch. They were in touch with something that gave them stability in the worst of circumstances. They were able to thrive because they truly existed independent of this world. They were in this world, but nadavat padmamiva, like a lotus flower on the water. All these things and more we learn from this festival. Thank you very much. Let's do some kirtan. Hare Krishna.